Hello and welcome to episode number 624 of Smart Podcast Trashy Books. I'm Sarah Wendell. My guest today is Christine M. Larson. Dr. Larson is the author of a new book, Love in the Time of Self-Publishing, How Romance Writers Changed the Rules of Writing and Success. Sound like it is relevant to our House of Wheels. This was published by Princeton University Press this year, and this book is nifty. It's literally about us. Now, I was interviewed for it, and we are going to talk about all of the things inside it, including my favorite parts, the idea of identity-driven ethics of care. And we also talk about RWA and the need for a collective unified body for creative people. So you're going to come for the vintage Romancelandia gossip, and you're going to stay for the labor activism. At least that's my experience. I will have links to this book and all of the other books that we talk about in the show notes at smartpitchestrashybooks.com/podcast under episode 624. That's a really big number. Speaking of numbers, hello, Patreon community. I have a compliment today, which makes me so happy. To Aspen J. Dogs everywhere love walking by your house because the traces of your footsteps communicate to them how kind and loving and excellent you are wherever you are in the world. If you would like a compliment of your own, or you would like to support this here show, have a look at patreon.com/smartbitches. Monthly pledges start at $1. You get a wonderful Discord, bonus episodes, the complete scan of every Romantic Times issue that I and my flatbed scanner have created slowly, very slowly. But it would be wonderful to have your support. If you value the show and you like what we do, that is the greatest way to help us keep going. Plus, you make sure every episode is accessible to everyone thanks to a transcript hand-compiled by Garlic Knitter. Hey, Garlic Knitter, hope your day is going good. Thank you for being part of the Patreon, and thank you for your consideration. If you'd like to join, we'd love to have you. All right, you ready to talk about academic writing, Romancelandia? This is such a fun book and a really fun conversation, and I hope you enjoy it. On with the podcast.
Oh, yeah. Smart Bitches is my happy place.
That's so nice of you to say. Thank you.
It's nice of you to do.
Well, I have to start by saying I'm really sorry. Well, actually, I have to start by making sure I have your consent to record our conversation because I'm in a dual consent state. Do I have your consent to record our conversation, please?
You absolutely have my consent.
All right. So that's out of the way. So I have written books. And I know they take a while. Mm-hmm. And you spend a lot of time thinking this fucker is never going to get done. Why did I do this? And I just, I read your book in one day. I'm really sorry.
Oh my God. That's wonderful.
So, and I always, I sat outside yesterday and I was just having the best time. And then I'd pick it up and be like, look, there's a whole chapter about RWA in here. And back I'd go. It is very weird to read a book. And I don't remember my own verbiage. I don't remember things I say. So I'm like, oh, that was a really smart statement. Oh, fuck, I said that. Like, would just run into myself as a citation. That was weird. But I read it in one day and I feel guilty because I know it takes longer than a day to write a damn book. But that was really a fun book. Thank you very much for a really fun afternoon.
Well, thank you for helping me write it. You know, your book, your Smart Bitches book was my model for the initial tone of the book.
Wow. Thank you. I didn't know that.
Yeah, it was. I was like, oh, you can write something really smart and still be like funny and sassy.
Deeply sarcastic.
I did. I have to tell you, my editor said I had to dial back the sarcasm a little bit.
No, you do not ever have to dial back the sarcasm. Not around here anyway.
That's why I'm happy to be here. Academia is a little bit different than Romancelandia.
Oh, you don't say. Oh, yes. Yes, it is. Oh, well, this is slightly awkward because we've already been talking, but
I gotcha. Now we have to start.
Well, no, I just need you to introduce yourself and tell the people who will be listening who you are and what you do.
I gotcha. Yeah. All right. So I am Dr. Christine Larson.
Hell yeah.
And hell yeah, use that title. I earned it. I teach at the University of Colorado Boulder. And I study digital technologies, innovations, and networks, which led me into the fascinating world of Romancelandia.
I love when academics sort of stumble into romance and are like, oh, hang on. This is a rich text, as the academics say. I'm assuming that you read all of the work from the two sociologists who studied romance writing communities.
Yes.
Dr. Lois and Dr. Joanna.
Yes, I met them at my first RWA, and they could not have been more helpful and welcoming.
Oh, aren't they great?
They're wonderful.
I'll tell you, I met them at RWA, and my experience with press and with academics is I enter conversations with media people and academics with a great deal of caution. Because I don't know unless I know them already, I don't know if they're entering from a place of, oh, look at this bullshit, I'm going to make fun of it, or I really want to understand this, and how willing they are to engage with, let's be honest, some of the weirdness of the romance community. So I met with the two sociologists at their first RWA. Yeah, I was a very sarcastic source for them, those poor ladies.
Sociologists call sources like that informants.
Mm-hmm.
So you're a key community informant.
I was informing the hell out of everybody. I didn't care. So congratulations on this nifty book.
Thank you.
Did you absolutely have a litter of kittens when you saw how good looking this cover is? It's so good.
I was so excited. The designer is a genius.
Yes.
And she just got everything just right.
It's so good. It is so gorgeous. So congratulations on loving the time of self-publishing. What led you to writing this book, and what was your focus while you were writing or when you started? Because you take quite a journey in this book.
Yeah, it was a journey. And the book started with a heartbreak, actually. I was in grad school after a fairly long career in journalism, and I decided to get my PhD because that seemed like a good idea.
At the time, sure. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. All right. Yeah. So the second year of grad school, my marriage ended unexpectedly.
Ooh, no fun. Bad. No thanks. 0 stars.
Yeah. Unhappy surprise. And I was suddenly a single mom with my 8-year-old twin boys.
That's a lot of small humans to take care of.
It's a lot. And then when the dust settled and I could finally sit back down at my computer, I blanked. I just was terrified. I couldn't focus on what I was researching, which was journalism and innovation and digital technologies. And fortunately, I had done a story for the New York Times not long before in my other identity as a journalist. And I had talked to Hugh Howey, the science fiction writer, who had had a lot of self-publishing success. And he told me that just offhand, he said that the people who were really succeeding in self-publishing were the romance writers.
Yes.
So So I was staring at my computer one day trying to be an academic, and I said, I need a different project. I emailed a few romance writers. They got back to me immediately. And then I just got focused and wrapped up in this mystery about how the most ridiculed authors in history transformed the publishing industry.
Yep, a little bit.
Yep. So it was a distraction that it lasted 8 years.
That's a very good distraction. I mean, that's not like just like picking up a hobby and then all of a sudden you have supplies. Like you came out of it with a whole ass book too.
Oh yeah, I picked up hobbies too.
Well, I mean,
I'm knitting socks now. Yeah.
Socks is good. Yeah, I'm working on a quilt. I have to finish mine. What did you learn while researching this that really, really struck you, whether that you're still thinking about? There are a couple of things that really struck me, and I'm really curious which ones are yours.
Oh, I want to hear what yours are, but the big takeaway for me was the power of relationships and networks to drive innovation and change.
Mm-hmm.
And I saw this happen 3 times with romance writers, once in the 80s and 90s with the rise of RWA, once with the rise of self-publishing, and then finally with the drive for diversity inclusion, which was long overdue. And like at each of these moments, it was unique and powerful female networks that made change happen. So that's really stayed with me.
That's absolutely true too. One of the things that I've noticed, so I don't know if you're aware, on the podcast, we're doing a project called Romantic Times Rewind, where every other episode is looking at an old issue of RT. In the issues that we've looked at, there are such early mentions of how to buy ebooks and ads that will, this part just makes me so sad. It's like reading about all these bookstores that are gone. We sell ebooks in the following formats. And it's like 10 formats for devices that don't even exist anymore. And this was 20 plus years ago. RT was really instrumental in teaching people, okay, the new wave is ebooks, and here's how you read them, and here's where you buy them, and here's how you get them onto your device or your phone or computer or whatever. And this was all, a lot of it was very reader driven because readers were teaching other readers at the conferences as well. And it's fascinating because at the end of all of these major movements, the drive was, okay, but I just want to have good books that I like to read. That was the major motivation. Like, this is our genre. We want good books to read. We want good books to read that are more sexual than publishers are willing to produce, that include marginalized communities and marginalized people accurately and fairly, instead of, this is the struggle of their life, that they are not white or straight or whatever. We want good books. Get out of the way. It's really cool, isn't it?
It's so cool. And I am so glad you're doing that. I was also fascinated with your interview with Steve Ammidown.
Oh, yeah.
About the amazing romance writer index, like social media before, the handbook.
Seriously, there's like 200 pages of pseudonyms in this little thing. I got weird romance reference books on my desk. It's really fun.
I do too. I know. It's so fun. I'm really glad you're doing that. But you raised an amazing point, which is romance writers were the pioneers of ebooks. And we are talking about like floppy disks. And we are talking about like, send me a check and I'll send you a PDF.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Send a self-addressed stamped envelope with your check and I'll send you some bookmarks to go with my ebook. Like, it's all there.
Exactly. Exactly. And like we laugh about it, but it's also really serious. Like, these were digital innovators. And when we think about digital innovators, not you and me or your listeners, but when a lot of America thinks of digital innovators, they think of like Mark Zuckerberg or like young, skinny white guys. And nope, like ebooks, we would not be where we are today without romance writers.
It's absolutely true. The other thing that really struck me, and this is what I wanted to ask you to talk more about, was the concept of ethics of care. And I find this so fascinating because the ethics of care and then the idea of like general philosophy ethics operate not quite in opposition, but they are very different. And it was very interesting because one of the things I was talking about with this book with my husband is that he and I are very different in a couple of major ways. But one of them is that he thinks very much in the macro. He's an attorney for the federal government, so he thinks in terms of like federal policy and oversight. So he's always thinking in the macro, including when it comes to like ethics and philosophy. And I'm always thinking, okay, but what about the individual people and how do we best support the individual people? Because you said that, ethics of care is rooted in empathy and connection and network. And I'm like, it's really interesting because this is illustrating a major division in our personalities. And I didn't know they had names. I get really excited when something has a name. I'm so excited. I know what to Google. Can you talk more? Can you talk more about ethics of care and how it applies to the romance community? Because I think that was really like the core of your book, is demonstrating all of the ways in which this concept has pervaded romance's organization, for lack of a better term.
I am so glad you asked about that because this whole diving into the ethic of care has transformed the way that I teach. I think about my teaching now really differently, and we can talk.
Interesting.
We can talk about that later. But so your husband subscribes to the traditional justice ethic, which arose from decades of philosophy, the idea of the most good for the most people. What is the most fair to everyone? And that sounds really good. But that kind of thinking was based almost entirely on the thinking of male moral philosophers who didn't have to take care of kids and care for, their extended kinship networks. And the ethic of care was proposed by philosopher Virginia Held in the 80s, early 90s, and developed by Joan Tronto, another feminist moral philosopher. And the idea of ethics of care is that our actions and moral decisions should be driven by the people that we have sort of moral investment in taking care of. And that in a community or an organization, say Romance Writers of America, there was an ethic of care that we need to make sure that the needs of everyone in our group are taken care of.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, most of America, including RWA, had their blinders on and thought, well, for a long time, thinking, well, what's good for our dominant group, in this case, white, middle class, well-educated women, is good for all of our members because it will float all the boats, the rising tide. But the ethic of care needed to be more identity aware. And there's another scholar who writes about identity aware ethic of care. That's Sue Robinson. And that means making sure, it means recognizing that people's needs are different depending on their life experience. And in that ethic of care, we need to make sure that everyone's needs in our community are being met in that way. So that is Moral Philosophy 101 for today.
Well, thank you very much. I appreciate that. I love having a word for, I love having descriptive words and knowing, like I always suspect someone has researched this. I just don't know what it's called. Somebody's thought of this. Somebody has done this. I love the concept of using identity-aware ethics of care to look at everything that has happened with romance and specifically with RWA. Was it Laquette that said that like RWA and romance is like a microcosm of every other large issue that's happening?
Mm-hmm.
It's so true. It is so completely true. And it's really interesting to have this sort of book document of what happened. So let's talk about RWA, for example, for just for a little bit. What did you think of the news that RWA was filing for bankruptcy and included mention of DEI as their filing? What I actually wrote down in my original draft of questioning. So how big is the dent in your desk? Is it head-shaped? Because mine is head-shaped because I was so mad. Oh, I was so mad. Oh,
I know. I read your post.
I was a little pissed off, and I'm actually really proud that I managed to be coherent because really it was just me banging on the keyboard. I was so pissed.
I know. I have to tell you, it's that depressing mixture of sadness and anger.
Yeah.
Like I'm just still sad because RWA was so central for so long, forming friendships and really protecting so many writers. They made big missteps, but they actually did so much good and people made so many relationships through that. And a lot of people worked so hard to make it a better, more inclusive organization, and they were making steps. So like this didn't have to happen.
I know.
But then the mad part, of course, is like, why did they mention DEI? They opened up all these old wounds. And what's infuriating, and you've written about this, is that it did not lose members because of a DEI controversy. It lost members because of a disastrously mishandled ethics complaint against Courtney.
Yeah.
And, blaming DEI makes it sound like, oh, DEI is the problem. And it just gives ammunition to this anti-DEI movement. Oh, yeah, it's complicated.
It's a dog whistle. It was such a performative thing. And I sent it to, again, my spouse, who is an attorney, though not in bankruptcy. And he's like, that's really kind of weird because, the judge doesn't give a shit. Like the judge is just making sure you crossed your T's and dotted your I's correctly. The other thing I think that it illustrates is the wow, you really are just tripling down on bad decisions here, people. Is that it shows when and how badly they went over the trust thermocline. Have you heard this term before?
No, tell me.
Okay. I love this so much. I learned about this on the internet, which is where I learn a lot of cool things. So the trust thermocline is a business concept, and it is an idea that describes when a consumer has decided they are no longer going to engage with a product or a service or a company, where the mental cost of staying with a product or a brand is outweighed by the desire to abandon it. The trust thermocline can happen when you take your customers for granted, you have a history of bad customer service, and it's very difficult to win customers back once they cross the trust thermocline. So and thermocline is actually an oceanographic term, which I think is even more fun because it's super nerdy. But it basically describes when the ocean goes from warm to cold water, when the temperature drops significantly. And so it's a significant feature in oceanography, and it's become this term in business to describe when you have screwed up so badly, your customers are like, oh, okay. Like one example of a trust thermocline is the number of Teslas that now have a decal that say, I bought this before we knew he was crazy.
I think you've just given me a couple of ideas for more academic papers.
Sorry, my bad. My apologies.
It keeps me in business.
Sorry. But it is, I said this in one of my posts in 2020, like there is going to come a point where being a member of RWA is going to make you look bad. If you stay and every person of color has resigned and every member of the board who is a person of color, and then the whole damn board resigns, and people who weren't even board members are like, I'm out, and people are sending their readers back. Like you can't, even if for your own branding, and romance authors are so sensitive to the concept of personal brands because they've had to build them slowly and independently, the idea that your association with RWA is actually going to reflect badly on you is another example of how they have no ground to stand on anymore, because their members, the members who could make change and want to make change, are the mental cost of staying far outweighs the benefits of being in the organization.
Yeah, exactly. I always say, like, social media is an absolutely amazing tool for calling attention to issues, but it's like the eye of Sauron. Once you attract it, the pressure of doing anything, you're just under constant scrutiny. And and there's no, the other thing I think you talk about in your book is that social media is a great spotlight, but the spotlight doesn't last long enough to show how someone or a group or an organization is going to fix the problem. I always think back to the Tylenol tampering, which was in the 80s. I was very young for that. But that was all driven by television news and newspaper coverage. And it was originally a local story, and then it became national because Tylenol recalled everything. And that was when you started getting like tamper-proof lids. And now I can't open the ketchup without a pair of pliers. All of that was a response to, was it like eight poisonings that have never been solved? And that was a real effort to be like, we're going to fix this and we're going to make sure you understand that you are safe. Here's what we're doing. And that actually worked. Tylenol is a brand. It did.
Yeah.
It did, but that was also a totally different media era.
Exactly.
Where,
there's just print and news media. Like 6 o'clock, 7 o'clock news, and then everybody went to bed. Now, we have so many media fire hoses that we can, drown ourselves in, that because we're always looking for the new thing and our time of attention gets shorter and shorter, you don't see the progress. You don't see any repair. You don't see any efforts made to change until somebody with a bigger voice is like, oh, hey, I looked at this again and look at all the things that have happened. They need to attract attention back. But conflict and outrage generate way more interest than, I fixed it.
Right. Or then bureaucratic change.
Oh, boring.
I interviewed C. Shalab, who was really instrumental in trying to reboot RWA. And she has a deep background in DEI with like universities and corporate setting. That is not interesting to social media. Like, we revised all these internal policies.
Woo!
So it's a tough sell. But the second you do something wrong, you get all the attention, all the pressure, and that's understandable. Like, for sure, there were some, giant misstep.
I think that one of the things that the bankruptcy filing did, and I don't know whose decision it was to include mention of DEI, the Bloomberg headline that was like just sticking Courtney Milan's name in the slug of the article still pisses me off.
All right.
That really was, to me, a big signal of, we have not learned a thing. We will continue down this path. And I'm like, okay, have fun. We are not getting back together like ever.
Yeah.
The other focus of your book, and this does, connect to the bankruptcy filing, is that you talk a lot about the need for a collective unified body for creative people. And I have said to so many people, the loss of RWA is the loss of the conference and is the loss of the community and is the loss of all of these published authors and unpublished authors making incredible changes in an industry. That is a loss, but also they could advocate in a way that none of us can do individually. There was a person at Facebook that would answer the phone. There was a person at Amazon that would answer the phone. They could get on the phone and be like, Amazon, we have a problem with this member's account and you've turned it off. And we think this was AI driven. There was a person who'd be like, oh, let me look into that and get back to you. Give me a minute. Like, that loss is not measurable.
Yeah.
The loss of RWA as an advocacy group for authors, to publishers, to retailers, to agents is a huge loss. And I don't know if that part has fully been realized and understood. Do you know what I mean?
I know exactly what you mean. And I think that, like, in a lot of ways, let's say the practical reasons for joining RWA were going away already, because once upon a time, in the days of Vivian Stevens and Rita Clay Estrada, the only way to learn the craft and get connected to the industry was RWA.
Yep.
They were kind of the gatekeeper to the gatekeepers. Now, you want to learn to write romance? There are dozens of Discords. There are online groups. It's easy because that spirit of cooperation and mentorship is still there.
Yeah.
Lots of people to help you. So that part, the big organization isn't as critical as it once was. So it's really easy to lose sight of the fact that writers need advocacy on a level that they have never needed it before because of the dominance of tech platforms.
Yes. With the additional arrival of AI, the loss of somebody saying, no, we're not putting that in contracts. No, we are not going to have you at our conference if you do have this language in your contract. I mean, there used to be points of access that RWA was the only one to offer, and that's gone. They have no authority and they have no bargaining.
Exactly. You could basically get blacklisted as a publisher.
Oh yeah, it happened a couple times while I was a member. They blacklisted Harlequin Horizons, the self-publishing arm. I remember RWA in the early days. This might have been 2007, 2008. They unmembered. They unwelcomed all of the digital first presses because they had a problem with one, but they couldn't figure out how to deal with one. So they just all of you are no longer approved. And the other publishers were like, what the hell? We were, and this was back when, oh, you're not offering in advance. That's not a real publisher. Like, okay. One of the things that I get asked a lot by the media is, did RWA create change or was RWA dragged into addressing change? I'm like, it's usually the second one, because the authors were always ahead of the organization in terms of development.
Right. But the authors were RWA.
Yep.
So it's easy for insiders like you and me to say, oh yeah, everybody agrees that RWA as an organization was slow to recognize self-publishing or even resisted self-publishing. But when you compare it to other writing organizations like SFWA, the Science Fiction Fantasy Writers of America, I love them, or Mystery Writers of America, RWA actually was way ahead of the time. So for romance writers who are always the leading edge innovators, maybe it seemed slow for the RWA kind of establishment and conference planners to catch on. For the rest of the publishing industry, they were still way ahead.
Yeah. So when you wrote about how Vivian Stevens' boss was like, girl, you created a union and that's a problem here. And I remember very frequently being told RWA is a professional business organization. We are a trade organization. We are a trade association. We are not a union. Do you think that we will ever have something like a union?
I wish. I really wish that could be the case.
Wouldn't work under federal law right now.
Right. You'd have to change federal law because So screenwriters and musicians, like other creative people, are able to form trade unions because they work as basically as employees of, say, a film studio. They are de facto employees. And when you're an employee under federal law, you can band together. But because romance writers are freelancers, federal law says if they band together, it's price fixing. So that's one reason why RWA is so careful to say, nope, we are not a union.
Or a trade
they would lose
organization.
they'd lose their tax status.
Yeah.
That said, in the gig economy, labor law needs to change because
Yes.
so many of us are technically entrepreneurs in one way or another.
Mm-hmm.
And we need to be able to protect ourselves.
Yes, that's very true.
This whole idea of the gig economy and do what you love and hopefully get paid for it can be, if you talk to academics and people who work in the gig economy, like say freelance writers like me, you know that a lot of that is rhetoric that really benefits somebody else, like tech companies.
For sure. For sure. For a romance fan who hasn't read a lot of academic work, I have to say this is enormously accessible and very friendly and interesting, but also rigorous in terms of the way you describe research and the way you describe collecting data. Like that part I would not know how to deal with any of that. And I noticed that you were using a lot of other sources to help you analyze data, and you would bring in scholars like Janice Radway and other scholars to look at the data that you had. What was that process like?
Because I come from journalism, and one of the things I teach in narrative journalism, I wanted to see if we could do something similar using academic research. I also wanted more than 6 people to read my book.
I mean, fair.
Yeah. So I tried to write it in a way that if you just want to read the narrative, you can do that. And if you just want to read the scholarship, you can do that. And if you are you, Sarah, then you can read it all. I use a process called member checking, where every time I wrote a lot about someone, like say Janice Radway, who like I tell her little story, I would send them that section. Same with Laquette or Bella Andre. And that like not for their approval per se, but to see what conversation that sparked. With some of the deeper analysis, like I did the social network analysis, looking at who shared advice with whom, which let me say definitively that romance writers have this very unique type of network. I tracked down another grad student at Stanford with me at the time, Elspeth Reddy, and she knew nothing about romance, but everything about social network analysis. And she just found this data really, really interesting. So if I could get other scholars intrigued by some of the questions, then they would kind of come on and help me. And they were usually women motivated by an ethic of care.
Yeah.
And an interest in this amazing story. So
nice job. That must have been fun.
It was really, really fun.
I also imagine that type of involvement makes it more attractive to an academic publisher because they've got all of these names to connect in this one work.
Yeah, that's another thing that I think needs to be done more in academia right now is this, like, we're all in our little silos and our silos are getting smaller and smaller, just like
in romance.
The rest of us are. Yeah. Like when we can connect those conversations, I think we all learn a lot more.
And you can also build on already done research and expand on how people are looking at different ways of communicating in networks.
Yeah. We find if I can get wonky for a minute.
Yeah, please get wonky. Get hella wonky.
Most of the time in networks, we find that people congregate with people who are like them. So that's called homophilic. That is, they love sameness. And the romance network turned out to be heterophilic, which meant that people of wildly different backgrounds and experience formed advice relationships with each other. So you would have, what was especially unusual is that elite romance writers, like published romance writers, best-selling romance writers, frequently formed advice relationships with up-and-comers. And it wasn't just that they were giving advice to the newbies. The newbies were giving advice to them on self-publishing. That's a particular kind of network called an open elite network.
Yeah.
The elite is open to forming relationships.
Yeah.
And what was interesting to me is that these unusual networks were also present in Renaissance Florence and in Silicon Valley during the biotech boom.
Oh, that's interesting.
Romance writers discovered something that also drove innovation at completely different historic times and circumstances and geographies.
That's so cool. That's just,
yeah.
I also loved how you talked about the second RWA, that people would join RWA, but then find their RWA network. And that was certainly true for me because I was in a weird space where I was an author, but I wasn't a romance author all of the time. I write about romance. I don't actually write romance as my job. I have written a romance. I've written a couple, but what I do is actually write about romance. And for a while there was like some concern that I was operating as press as a member. And I was like, I'm not operating as press. I am writing about this, but so is every author who has a blog. Because back then, every author had a blog. Some authors had like one blog for the 10 of them. But I was writing about romance, and there was just sort of like, well, what do we do with this group? I ended up finding my like RWA people. And I remember when I resigned my membership, I thought to myself, there are people I'm never going to see in person again now. I'm never going to see those people in person again, ever, unless I go and like show up on their house, and that would be creepy. And first of all, that was quite a loss. I was really bummed about that, and I still remain like bummed about it. But I also think it's very interesting that you have this large organization that does, on its policy level, tend towards a homogenous perspective.
Homogeneity.
Thank you, homogeneity. Word I cannot say on the first try. But within that, you have a lot of little networks where it's like, oh, I know who you need to talk to. So we're very open about like telling people who to talk to. Oh, you need to talk so-and-so. You need to talk so-and-so. But we form our own networks within the larger one that are more effective in addressing our needs. And that was certainly my experience. It was very cool to see that written up.
Yeah. Allison Kelly, the longtime executive director, called that trust groups. She says there are all these different trust groups. And one of my favorite examples of that is Vivian Stevens, after she was a romance editor, started a writing group for Black women authors.
Yes.
And those included like Shirley Hailstock and Donna Hill and Rochelle Allers and Sandra Kitt. And like, you can just see how those that's a network that was started in the 80s.
Yeah.
And like persists today.
What do you think romance readers will find in your book?
So romance readers will find that they are so important to the success of romance writers and of digital publishing. Like, without the unique bond between romance writers and romance readers, digital self-publishing and really the industry would not be where it is today.
Yeah.
And part of that is what you're exploring with RT. Like, this is the bonds between readers and writers were really unusual in fandom communities. And that's still true today. And I hope readers take away that they're a part of this community. They already know that.
Yeah.
But it's cool because you could just pick up there are a lot of casual romance readers who don't yet know about smart bitches or, but they're part of this thing.
Yep.
So I hope readers realize that they are part of something.
Oh, yes. And a very important part of things. So I always ask this question, what books are you reading right now that you want to tell people about?
Oh my God. How much time do you have?
It's the internet. I have no limits. I have no FCC oversight. I can say whatever I want. I have no federal communications guidelines. I'm a podcaster and a blogger. I'm just flying by the seat of my pants all the time.
There is another academic study. All right. So I am listening. So I'll tell you what I'm listening to. I'll tell you what I'm reading.
Fabulous.
I'm listening. Yes. Okay. So there's a debut author named Maya Ariel. She's writing what's kind of like a Devil Wears Prada in Hollywood, kind of like her heroine is at the bottom of the Hollywood hierarchy. And I am listening to it, and it is a fantastic performance. So that is When I Think of You by Maya Ariel. And I'm also listening to Cafe Con Leche, which is a trans romance by Emery Lee. And he's just really funny and wise and snarky. So those are really good listens. And then piled up on my Kindle, I've got the new Cat Sebastian. You Should Be So Lucky. I love Cat Sebastian. And then it's been a really stressful time. So I've been like going for some comfort reads. There's a new one by Chloe Angel. She writes about Australia's ballet world. And that's really cool because she is a journalist, and she's written deeply about the ballet world. So seeing her turn that into romance is great. And then also for comfort, I'm like revisiting the Montana Sky series by Deborah Holland. And then you'll laugh at this one. There's a romance writer named Maggie Marr. She wrote a series called Hollywood Girls Club, but she also is an IP lawyer, and she wrote a book called From Book to Film and TV. And I'm reading that because I really think this highly academic political economy of publishing would make a great Netflix series.
Oh, absolutely. No question. Oh, yes. I have said there really should be a documentary series about the RT convention or RT and romance generally. Especially, you talked about this in your book a little bit, and I've noticed this tension in other work that I'm doing. That RT was very much the man chest and the big hair and the Mr. Romance and the more salacious, tawdry camp aspects of romance. And RWA was like, no, we take ourselves very seriously. We do not do that. That tension still exists. It's just in different venues now. I think that would be an amazing documentary series too.
Totally. You should do it.
No, I'm not a filmmaker, and I'm old and I'm tired. I don't want to.
I know. I'm so tired.
Where can people find you if you wish to be found?
There are two places they can find me. I have a website. It's christinelarson.com. And also, if you really want to talk to me, you can go to University of Colorado Boulder, and my contact info is there.
Fabulous. Thank you so much for doing this interview, and thank you for your book. It was a really fun read. And I personally have been having a lot of trouble reading text. I've been doing a lot more audiobooks lately, and it has been a while since I sat down and read a book cover to cover and was like, fabulous. I feel great. So thank you for that.
Oh, thank you. Your praise means a lot to me.
Oh, thanks.
And it was a long time coming. And I just love getting to talk to you.
Thank you. So. And thank you for including me. It was weird to run into myself, but it was pretty cool.
You're in the index. I know, right?
I know. Wow. Don't think I didn't send pictures of to my dad. Like, look at that. Like Mandel, comma Sarah, and like a bunch of pages.
Awesome. That's so great.
And that brings us to the end of this week's episode. Thank you to Dr. Larson for connecting with me. And if you are thinking, I kind of want to look at this book, well, I have links to all of the books we talked about at smartbitchestrashybooks.com/podcast under episode 624. I always end with a terrible joke. This week is no exception. I would never let you down. This joke comes from Brawler in our Discord. Did you know that Bigfoot is sometimes confused with Sasquatch? It's true. Sometimes Bigfoot is confused with Sasquatch. Yeti never complains. Yeti never complains. Thank you, Brawler. Yeti. I love the bad jokes. Please keep sending them. They make my day. I also love hearing what happens when you tell them to other people. And, if you want to tell me about the show or ask me questions or anything, you can always contact me at sarah@smartbitchestrashybooks.com. On behalf of everyone here, we wish you the very best of reading. Have a great weekend, and we'll see you back here next week. Smart Podcast Trashy Books is part of the Frolic Podcast Network. You can find outstanding podcasts to subscribe to at frolic.media/podcasts.